Welcome to the B-Sides and Beers podcast.
What's everybody having to drink here tonight? Anybody have anything different?
Well, every time I come on here, I'm going to have something different, I think. So tonight I have, look out. Tonight I have, let's see. It is an Irish Cream Imperial Stout from Old Yale Brewing Company in Chilliwack. Yeah, it's an 8.0 or 8%. So it should be something interesting. I have yet to have one yet. So yeah.
Right on.
That up there.
Beautiful. Yeah, that looks good.
Yeah, next.
Mm-hmm. Dane, what are you drinking?
Can you give me 30 seconds with the hummingbird fiasco? I mean, I've got my regular Roche right now, but I got something special, so give me 2 seconds.
Beauty.
Yeah, go for it. I have nothing else that's special because I purchased whatever it was, 6, because I've drank them all except for this little bit. I've 6 bottles of Pink Whitney before COVID started or during COVID, so I'm just tailing into that final descent of all the Pink Whitney I've been drinking. So, 6 bottles over 3 months of COVID.
That's not awful.
How
big's the bottle?
Right, isn't it? Yeah. 750 mils. So what's that?
See.
That's a 2.6, isn't it? 7. Oh,
Pink Whitney.
that's a 2.6, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's
6
okay.
2.6s over 3 months. That's pretty good.
No, I am not an alcoholic.
tell
No, I
myself
do not have problems.
That's right. No, yeah.
Yeah,
not a part
I'm not
of
an
a
alcoholic. I'm a drunk.
podcast
There's a
that talks
difference.
about beer. And, yeah, that's right. Know the difference. Okay, Dane, what do you got now?
This is one of my favorite breweries called Yellow Dog. It is a Chase My Tail Pale Ale. Yeah. Port Moody. Yeah.
Okay. Are we diving into Judgment Night?
Yeah,
We're doing Judgment Night?
We might as well dive in.
We're doing these separately. Yeah, we want to do these separately.
Yeah, We're doing all 3 separate. Yeah. So tonight, this first one we're going to do is for episode 4. We'll be diving into the soundtrack to the 1993 action thriller Judgment Night. It wasn't a big box office movie, but the soundtrack kicked a lot of ass. It had Emilio Estevez, Cuba Gooding Jr., Dennis Leary, and Everlast from House of Pain. Have either of you watched the movie, or is this a complete new thing?
For me, I saw that movie like back when it first came out, like maybe a year or 2 after it came out.
Right.
And Emilio Estevez is in this movie, isn't he?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. That's the one I remember then. So I remember very little about it. And then when you talked to me about Judgment Night soundtrack, I had to go back and remember what it was. And I didn't remember, I don't think, all of that because I didn't listen to it back in the days. So when I listened to it again, or for the first time really, I didn't know that there was all this collaboration on here and all these strange, mix mashups. But yeah, no, I don't really remember the movie too much at all. But again, after doing a little bit of research and reading, it didn't sound like it did too hot at the box office, or didn't.
So was this a sequel to Judgment Day?
No, it was not. This was just its own thing. So
Okay, because I did all my notes on Judgment Day. So
What is Judgment Day? What am I thinking here?
this is Judgment Day or do I just have the title wrong here?
All my research on the wrong movie.
Movie released in 1993, and we got like Pearl Jam,
Judgment
Cypress
Day.
Hill, and,
Yeah.
like,
So that's Judgment
Mudhoney.
Night. So you just got the wrong name.
oh, I got the title wrong. So
Damn.
obviously I haven't seen the movie, but I
Okay.
have listened to the soundtrack.
Okay.
I think Judgment Day is a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, if I'm not mistaken.
That's maybe why I wrote down.
I'll talk about
Judgment
that
Day.
movie too. I don't know much about it, but I'll talk about Arnie. That's cool. When's the last time you've seen this, Mike?
Oh, last time I saw this movie was probably 15 years ago.
Oh, okay. So you haven't listened to it either.
So yeah, basically
Or watched
forever.
either.
But but the album. Well, I've seen the movie quite a few times over the previous period, but the last time I saw it was about 15 years ago. So
Yeah.
yeah, but the album is pretty well constant rotation for me in one form or another. So.
Yeah, Dane, had you listened to this before? Had you had any knowledge of it?
I had not. And the funny thing is, with everyone sort of doing these interesting, like your top 10 albums on social media right now, a couple of my buddies put this up.
Yep.
And so I've not listened to it until this afternoon, to be honest with you.
Wow.
And it's super interesting because obviously this is like the mashup CD of the 90s.
Yeah, basically.
There's some interesting pairings here, and there's some like pretty killer songs, and there's some pretty not killer songs.
Well, this album was completely life-changing for me because it came out in 93. We were, 12? So, I mean, basically, the backstory why I chose this album anyway for this episode, growing up, I was raised, in 60s, 70s, 80s rock, metal, and blues kind of deal. And around 88 or so, I would have been about 8, I found Rap City on Much Music. So for people that don't know Much Music, it's basically Canada's version of MTV. So that came out in 88, Rap City. There was a VJ prior to Master T, but most people that watch that show know the cat Master T. And I guess through that Rap City, I found, I was introduced to guys like Eric B. and Rakim and Run DMC and Ice-T, Sir Mix-a-Lot, who else? LL Cool J, Public Enemy, that kind of deal. And then from there on, I was, really obsessed with all things rap and hip hop, and that carried on through the early to mid 90s with Cypress Hill and House of Pain and Onyx and stuff like that. So it was quite life changing to me. And then it kind of goes back to 93. My folks bought our first CD player. Prior to that it was just cassettes, right? So and with cassettes I had Eric B. and Rakim and a lot of these mixtapes of Run DMC and Public Enemy and whatever. And so they bought this CD player, and the first CD I was ever given, I don't remember who, I think it was an aunt or something, gave me the first self-titled Seal 1991 CD, which was, I don't even remember it now. I went back trying to listen to it again, doing research for this, and it was, I don't even know why I got it. Anyway, and
life-changing, man. That's a life-changing album.
Completely life-changing. Completely. Not for me, but for some.
Yep.
And then going to the first 2 actual CDs that I was able to purchase. The first one was called Power in the Hood. It was a hip-hop compilation with who was on there? DFX and Arrested Development, Pete Rock, and CL Smooth.
Wow.
Naughty by Nature, Gangstar. It had Leaders of the Old School with Busta Rhymes, which is awesome. Had Public Enemy and Black Sheep. And then the second one I bought was Judgment Night. Now, before hearing Judgment Night, I purchased the album because I saw House of Pain and Onyx and Cypress Hill, and I knew these guys quite well. And so I bought the album for the rap, and then as soon as it kicked in with, first track is with Helmet and House of Pain as a team up, and I went in for rap, and I was hooked on the metal, and I had never heard anything like that prior. I mean, like I said, it was 60s, 70s, 80s kind of rock and metal, so that was a complete different lane, right? So from then I was just hooked on everything heavy with the rap, but it was just a completely different path for me. So, and it was cool because you always kind of think back from the music you listened to growing up being your parents' influence, and then you go back to what music was, the first album or the first songs you figured were yours, the first that you could connect to in your music development as being my music, not, your folks' music kind of deal. So that was the big change for me.
Yeah,
so.
That's super interesting. I mean, and this album is such a cluster of different influences, right? It's all over the place. Cypress Hill was always like, I haven't listened to Cypress Hill in a really long time, but I think there's 2 tracks on here with Cypress Hill, and it just brought me right back to like grade 9 and grade 10, and really, really interesting. There's one track on here with Pearl Jam and Cypress Hill. Like, how crazy is that? And it kind of works. It's actually like a decent song.
Well, all of them work perfectly, and I don't know who the producer was. I was trying to dig out the exact. I know the main idea of it, the brainchild, I guess, was basically DJ Muggs and Everlast. From what I can find, that might be. There's probably other factors
Rick
in
Rubin,
it,
man.
I mean, the whole idea of this was not a complete original idea, because you can look back to Run DMC and Aerosmith doing their collab for Walk This Way in 86, and then Public Enemy and Anthrax for Bring the Noise in 91, and then you've got for an early rap metal kind of idea was you look at Booyah Tribe for Picking Up the Metal, Picking Up Metal in what was it, 1990. So
yeah, Booyah Tribe's great, man.
Yeah.
I love that. I love Booyah Tribe. It's so good. And then when I saw that they were on here, I kind of forgot about them. So that brought me back to Booyah Tribe. So that was kind of cool how some of this stuff, when you research it, you kind of forget about. I find it like some of these things you forget about, and then you go back to it and you're like, oh yeah, like, you see a name or you see a band that you haven't seen in a long time, and you're like, yeah, totally forgot about those guys, Yeah, that was what, going back to the Cypress Hill and Pearl Jam thing. I guess those guys, I read they were hanging out at Lollapalooza back in the day. So they just they had Cypress Hill said that they were friends with Ice Cube, and Ice Cube was like, yeah, man, come on backstage. You can hang out with whoever you want. So they hung out with Pearl Jam, and they were talking to him, and they were, yeah. And Eddie wanted nothing to do with this. He was like, thanks a lot. Like, Pearl Jam is just starting to get big, and he's doing a collaboration with Cypress Hill, who I don't know how big they are at this point, but to be like, no, I don't want to be on a major motion picture soundtrack. You guys can still do it and still call it Pearl Jam, even though I'm not singing. Most lead singers would probably be like, no, not chance.
The weird thing, and I'll get into this a little bit later on, is Pearl Jam had a lot of different sort of formations and variations. Mm-hmm. So I think, the boys were just like, yeah, whatever, we'll just do our thing. But anyway.
Yeah, it would just be strange, I think, even if we were back in the day, if we were still doing the band, if we were just making it big and, lead singer's like, no thanks. Like, I don't want to be a part of this project that you're doing with this rock rap group. Like, I don't
Right.
know. Seems weird, but he wasn't into it, so he said no. But I saw a couple other bands and groups that said no. Did you guys see that?
No,
Oh,
Yeah,
Nirvana said no.
they said no to everything.
I didn't know they were asked. That's crazy.
They were asked. Metallica said no.
Well, Metallica was too big for that album anyway. I mean, that was
Yeah.
after Black Album was out, and they didn't need anybody, right? So,
Yeah. And the last one I found that said no was Public Enemy.
right. But, yeah. No.
Not gonna do it. So, yeah, those guys were out. And the other thing I found too, which I thought was kind of cool, that is the last recorded Run DMC.
No shit.
Yeah,
Really?
that's the last. Yeah, that's the last thing that they did.
Wow.
Was the Judgment Night soundtrack. That's it. Yeah. And I don't. Again, I'm just here with the hot facts. So this should just maybe be a segment on each one of these.
Mike with the hot facts.
Maybe one's. Yeah. The Tool and Rage Against the Machine was supposed to be on this album.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
So they have this collaboration song, which is underwhelming.
Yes, I heard it too.
If you've heard it, yeah, it's kind of just
a couple years
It
back,
sounds
I tracked it
unfinished,
down.
I guess, but
Yep.
yeah, maybe they were going to do something else with it. But apparently, Tom Morello was all into it, and Rage was all into it. But Tool flaked out, I guess, in the last bit, and their record label was all strange, and they said everything just got weird, which sounds in line with what's
Right.
happening with Tool. So over the years, but anyways, yeah, that was that, because I was like, well, how come Rage is not on this at this point
Right.
of this, the year, like with this era,
Right,
it feels
right.
like Rage should have been on this album, and I guess they tried to, but I mean, I don't know. I was thinking too, like, who else keeps this rock rap thing going? You kind of got Rage Against the Machine carrying the torch, and then it kind of goes into the late 90s, and then we get into Limp Bizkit, and we get into Kid Rock, and we get all that, right?
Well, none of that was late. None of that was really late 90s. You look at Korn, you look at Deftones, you look at Limp Bizkit. Most of
Yeah,
that
that's
stuff
true.
was, 94, 95, 96. So you're only 2 years off, basically.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this album came out, and then everyone saw that it was possible, and they just took off with it, right?
Yeah.
Or at least it brought it to the forefront where artists could actually sell the idea to fans, and sort of mix the genres. So
I think Rage seemed the most authentic, and I don't know when that first album came out. The album cover is just like deadly. What's the name of that?
92
Was it 92? It
with the monk
yeah,
on fire.
it's just like self-titled. I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're talking about longevity, Mike, and I think like they are back together now, 2020, right? Probably.
Oh yeah, man. We tried to get tickets, or we thought about getting tickets to go see him
Yeah.
somewhere on this tour, but that's the $140 price tag, or north of that.
you can't
kinda was
justify
like-
it.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know, man.
really too bad, because the thing is, like, what I meant by authentic is the fact that I think Rage Against the Machine, they had this sort of like political, well, it wasn't an undertone. It was like they were all about being exactly, and that's what kind of made. I remember
An agenda.
being, super small and
Yeah.
young, and just like, oh, why are these guys so angry? And you kind of look into it, and they had this sort of authenticity to them, which like a lot of rap rock didn't really have. So I think as far as carrying the torch, like on the new Run the Jewels, I think there is. I'm not sure if it's Rage Against the Machine or if it's just. I'm sorry, having a blank right now. What's his name? De La Roche?
Zach De La Rocha. Yep.
Zach, yeah, De La Roca. He's on that, so he's still
is he?
he's still doing stuff. Yeah.
I sent Mike. I sent you that Run the Jewels. It was that one track.
You did, yes.
just recently
Yeah.
too. But yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that he's on there.
Yeah, that's a great album. That's a fantastic album, actually. And so what I'm thinking about, it's just popping up in my head right now, is this weird sort of like connection between rap and rock. Maybe I've had too many beers. Sorry, guys.
No, man, that's the name of it. Rop. Rop is the name of his.
So I mean, like when you listen to like old school rap, like Kumo D, and they're all talking about rocka. I'm gonna rock ya.
Yeah.
And there's always been this connection between rap and rock. And I don't know if that's, something to do with the image, the expression of it, the, intensity of the shows, like where there's sort of like a similarity between the two genres. And I never really...
You have to look at the artists that are doing it too. The guys from Cypress Hill, from what I understand, were metal fans growing up, and I could probably see that coming from quite a few of these other acts, probably Ice-T, because he had his whole body count thing.
That's right. I forgot.
Yeah.
Body count.
Right.
Yep. And that was the same time too. So
those guys are dangerous.
Body count.
And then you look at Faith No More.
Yeah.
They had a lot of rap sort of influence in their style too, right? So
Mike Patton especially. Yeah.
Yes, they are. Faith No More and Booyah Tribe.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Another Body Murder.
Faith
That
No
was
More's
a
on
solid
this
track.
Great track. Yeah. That, I mean, it was really interesting because you look at 93. I think that's around the time that Angel Dust was released. So Faith No More, it's a pretty polished album. It's a pretty awesome album, but like Mike Patton, who was an amazing singer, he sort of like stays within his lane. But you listen to this track with Booyah Tribe, and you hear some like the screams, like the range that Patton has, and it's like he's sort of taking from Mr. Bungle, that more experimental side of things. And then it's like, it's interesting to see like this sort of, him kind of experimenting with rap, because later on in 2007, he releases Peeping Tom. And that was some weird sort of like rap experimental band that he was in.
Yep.
So it was kind of like a prelude to like what, I don't know about the rest of Faith No More, but like Mike Patton especially, kind of like his direction.
What was his direction with Tomahawk? I don't remember. I meant to go back and check it out, but
Tomahawk, what's really weird? Tomahawk had 2 albums, and I was really into them. I think the first one was released in like 03, and then the second one was 06.
Right.
I really liked it, but now 2020 would they be able to release something like that?
Oh, probably not.
I don't know, man. I remember you gave me that album, and I listened to that album inside and out, and I still have it on my playlist. And I don't know if they would be able to do something like that again, but it's so good. Like, just, it's like a journey. That whole album is a journey, like from beginning to end. It's a crazy album. It's so good though.
So like heavily influenced by Native American music, but with Mike Patton being like the professional singer that he is, he, I'm sure, studied and like did his own interpretation of it, obviously. But yeah, it was a really, really interesting and amazing album.
Yeah.
You just crank it up and it does.
Yeah,
it does
and there's a
something
lot
to you.
of rap in there too, and there's rock in there, and there's Native American music, and there's psychedelic stuff, and there's electronic stuff. It's loaded. I wanted to just throw this out as our kind of, when we're talking about our first soundtrack episode. I found this quote, and I thought that it'd be a good way to either end this episode or frame this episode, however we want to do it. But I can get your guys' thought on this quote too. But there's this guy, Eddie Santiago, I found actually through the Purple Rain, doing my research on Purple Rain. But he said that that soundtracks are mere companion pieces designed to exploit the revenue potential of a movie. And I thought that was an interesting, quote. And you think too how popular the movie soundtrack was back in the early 90s, especially too, right? Like you think of The Bodyguard, I'm thinking of like these big ones back then that were huge, right? And all those ones like that. Even you think of Titanic, like these ones are still big, like in the grand scheme of soundtracks, right? So it's just interesting to think about, like, a whole bunch of songs that maybe have nothing to do with the movie, but just sound cool. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting concept, the soundtrack as a whole.
That's another thing that I had not had an opportunity to dig into, but I had the idea of trying to figure out when the first, I guess, what the first couple movies that came out that had a popular music artist soundtrack and wasn't just like a background music soundtrack with the orchestras, like the big scores and
but even you think like yeah. You think even like the Beatles were doing that back in the day. They're coming up with their own soundtrack for their own movie, right? Like back in the 60s, Hard Day's Night, Help, all that stuff. Yellow Submarine, that's just all them doing their own stuff.
But those movies, for the most part, were written around the album that they already have. I'm sort of talking about, okay, so
you're going the other
so we
way.
made a movie now.
Yeah.
How where do they come up with the idea of having certain artists do certain songs? I was kind of thinking it might have been the James Bond series, possibly. Maybe. But I didn't get too much opportunity to dig into that. So that might be another thing to dig in for a separate episode here. But
there's another episode too. What would you put on your own movie soundtrack? What songs would you put on your own movie soundtrack? Because I know I got a bunch.
Lots.
Yep.
Lots of
rap
rock.
Oh yeah,
so much rap rock
on repeat.
Lots of it. Yeah.
But it is an interesting question because, there's some, soundtracks that are absolutely synonymous with the movies. Like if you think about Rocky,
mm-hmm.
and that's fucking Eye of the Tiger right there. And everyone knows that. Mm-hmm. But then there's some soundtracks that it's like oil and water, with the movie that came out. They had it in the can for a year and then they found a whole bunch of artists. And this is kind of a segue into my, maybe I'll hold on to that. But it's interesting that you said that because I think now I think everything is so dialed in as far as soundtracks and everything happens so instantaneously that it's kind of hard to pick it apart. But you look at a couple movies from, for example, I was just thinking about Top Gun. Okay, so that movie was great visually, but also the music kind of made that movie.
Right.
Dun, 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 dun,
Totally.
dun, but that song wasn't on the radio.
No.
I kind of wish it was, but it was a soundtrack that makes you fired up, but it was scored specifically for that movie. No one really stood up.
Going along, and going along with Tom Cruise movies too, like Cocktail was like that too.
Actually,
everybody had Cocktail. Yeah, right. Like I remember my grandma had that tape. Like everybody had that tape, right? Like it was just like
what a great song.
Beach Boys Kokomo was just like crossover stuff, right? Like,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like they tapped into that. It's just at the right time, right?
Yeah. And going back to Top Gun, it's like, Kenny Loggins called. You're in the danger zone.
That guy was the king of the 80s soundtrack. That guy must be on like 50, 80 soundtrack.
Yeah, that's great.
But I don't even know. Like I was talking to Kira about it this morning, and I was like, "Can you name like a somewhat contemporary movie, and a soundtrack to go with it?" And we're like, "Nah, not really," because I think it's just it's all done so quickly and so like, in the moment that there isn't really. You don't really have time for like the soundtrack to take on its own sort of life and the movie to either suck
To be its own art form, really.
Exactly. And
it's quite often they pick out who's the big pop star right now, and then we're just going to cram them into whatever song to throw it in the movie to sell albums to.
And they're in the fucking movie, and and everything else, right? But.
Yeah, and I think too that this is a day and age too that those soundtrack albums were essentially mixed CDs, which is something that was not able to be fabricated back in 1991 by yourself, right? So you're like, wow, I get all these tracks on this one album, man, like of all these artists. It's like a mixed CD already made for you, right?
Yeah, and that was the big thing with compilations back. I mean, we had to dub our own tapes. Either off the radio or whatever, and spend hours.
But the amazing thing with these movies was like you got, your favorite bands on these soundtracks, but they were all like original songs that you've never heard before.
And quite often they were written for it specifically.
Yeah, and whether they worked with the movie or not, who knows? Yep. But you got like a song that you've never heard Pearl Jam play before, and like, whoa.
Well, that was the big thing, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it was like that Romeo and Juliet soundtrack with the Radiohead track.
Oh yeah, pack a fucking sandwich, or how does it? It was just what's this. That line?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. Talk show host is the name of that song. But there's a different version of it, and I had never heard the different version of it. And it blew my mind because I'd only heard this one remix version of it apparently. And and that's the thing too. Like some of these soundtracks I found back in the day too introduced you to some people and introduced you to some bands too, right? And you were like, this is a cool, like, who is this?
Well, that's why this Judgment Night was so mind blowing and life changing for me, because I turned it on. Like I said, I bought it for House of Pain and Onyx and Run DMC and Ice-T and whatever, and then I get into it and it's like, okay, if we're gonna go a partial track by track, I mean, you've got Helmet and House of Pain for the first time. So as soon as that song kicked in with Helmet, I had never heard riffs like that before. I'd never heard tone like that before. It just grabbed me. And, it just kind of opens you up to another world. I'd never heard of, had the opportunity to hear Helmet before. I never got into Living Color till after that. Biohazard, I didn't get into that prior to. And then it's like, okay, Biohazard's on here. So now I have to go out and get their first album. What was it? Urban Discipline. So you grab that, and then I had never had an opportunity to hear Slayer. So this was probably my first introduction to Slayer at 12 years old, because really I had nobody older to show me these bands, right? So it was an introduction for me to Slayer and Faith No More and Sonic Youth and Mudhoney. I didn't know who Mudhoney was. Dinosaur Jr., Pearl Jam. We were, they already had 10 out, so you were familiar with the radio songs for the most part, but it was mind-blowing to hear these heavy ass artists that I've never heard before, and it just put me into a completely new lane where I just wanted to pursue all of that. So that's where these soundtracks can
awesome,
change your
man.
life, I guess. So.
A life-changing album soundtrack.
Yeah.
Mudhoney and Sir Mix-a-Lot, though, I gotta say, maybe I have to listen to it a couple more times. You know what? It's just
It was silly,
one of
but
those
it was
things.
cool.
Probably have to listen to it a couple more times, and I'll have it on my.
Yep. Freak mama. Yeah.
I read a thing on Sir Mix-a-Lot when he was talking about going into the studio, and it just blew his mind. He's like, there was this guy on bass. He's like, and there was this other guy on the drums. And I'm like, I guess these hip hop guys go in there and just have nobody else in there but
Fucking
the mic
808.
and
They're all
mix and the
pre-produced by
headphones and they
the
just-
DJ, right? So and they call them.
Yeah,
in and do their thing, so-
absolutely. Yeah. There's no Neil Peart drum kit set up in the studio with 49,000 mics, just a bottle of Cristal and ready to go.
Well, that's it for episode 4. I hope this inspires you to check out the Judgment Night soundtrack and maybe dig into other soundtracks you may have overlooked. Please subscribe and comment on our YouTubes. Follow, like, and share on Instagram at B-Sides and Beers Podcast. Follow on the Spotify. Subscribe, rate, share on Apple Podcasts. Pretty much every other streaming platform. Thanks a lot. Cheers.